Good morning. It's March 4, another beautiful spring day here in Santa Rosa. I'm back with Gary with lots of information to convey today, lots of news coming out about the vaccines. So what we're going to talk about today is briefly touch on our vaccine clinics and the supply or lack thereof supply. We're going to touch on the epidemiology and talk about some new items, particularly the J&J vaccine, and then finish up with some of the questions you might be getting from your patients. So I'm going to start off with just talking about the vaccines and our supply. As you've probably heard through the grapevine, through the PD, we virtually have no vaccine available to us. We've received no Moderna and no Pfizer for several days. We've essentially canceled all of our clinics for first and second doses, and we don't have an accurate start date for when we will be receiving vaccines, so it's kind of a day-by-day issue. Sutter has asked to be included in the distribution of the new J&J vaccine. When we get that, we don't know, and exactly how we're going to use that has yet to be determined. On the communication front, it's a challenge. Sutter did send out 1.6 million MHO messages last Friday to our patients, informing them about the realities and the challenges we have with our vaccine supply. And then, of course, a lot of individual messages to individuals where we've had to cancel a lot of appointments. And you should know that as we've canceled appointments, we will be rescheduling those patients in the order that they were previously scheduled to receive their vaccine. And then the last thing you need to know is you'll be seeing information that in accordance with the CDPH, California Department of Public Health, we will be announcing that we're opening up to a new tier on March 8th, which is essential workers in their definitions of those. And then the week following, we'll be opening up to those under the age of 64 with comorbidities. It's a bit of an academic announcement. If we don't have vaccine, we don't have vaccine. But we are committed to remaining in alignment with the public health at both the state and the county level. And that's kind of what's driving those announcements to our patients. So that communication will be going out to patients also in the near future. So that's what's happening here. But Gary, maybe you can give us an update on what's happening worldwide and with the whole epidemiology.
Yeah, so thanks for having me again. You know, it's been amazing that no matter what week and what month happens, things happen quickly with this pandemic. And certainly things are still in shape and in flux. Epidemiologically, things for the vaccine look okay. We're certainly down on the second wave, and I'm going to show you a number of epidemiologic graphs. First graph I want to show you is the United States. And I'm going to walk you through this one a little bit, because notice on the left-hand side, the first arrow, that's the first wave. The second arrow, as you move to the right, that's not the second wave. That's where we tried to open up the public, we opened up businesses, and the first wave got worse. And so that's what we want to avoid right now as we're on the backside of the second wave. The third arrow shows the second wave very clearly here. That was clearly the hammer. It was in 1918 as well. And then I put a black arrow to the very right of this slide. The black arrow shows where in the US things have plateaued. So things went down very quickly off the second wave, and then they stalled. And right where they stalled, people are worried about that. And that's in the setting of states like Mississippi, Texas, Iowa, Montana stopping their mask mandates. South Carolina is opening up for mass gatherings. So that might be why we're seeing a plateau there. And then I put that black line. That black line represents where we are currently in the US. And that black line represents that we're at a level of the peak of the first wave for the US. So a little bit of time on that epi slide, because that kind of gives you some insights on how we're doing right now. The second slide is for California. And this is the California epi slide. You've seen this before. It shows we're coming down off the second wave, and we're still coming down. So California has not plateaued, and that's a good thing. The next one is the Sutter footprint. So the Sutter footprint epi curve shows the first and the second wave, and our positivity rate is about 3% right now in the Sutter footprint, but we're still going down, and this is despite in Southern California the struggle with some of the variants. And then the last one is going to be the most important one to show you. This is Sonoma County. Sonoma County, as you can see, we had this broad first wave, and it never really went down very low. So on the broad first wave, we never got down to the tiers that are set. So the State Department has said, you need to have certain number of tests that are positive and negative, certain number of cases per population at this level to be in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 2, 3 to open up the county. And so if you look at our epi curve, even now to the right of this slide, you'll see that we're really not close to tier 1. In fact, our caseload is about 10 cases per 100,000 people in Sonoma County. We need to be below 7 cases for 100,000 people. So I think that we still have a ways to go before we open up the county, and those are the governor's plans. And I really think that Governor Newsom is smart about this. He's done the right thing in order for us to try and flatten the curve with a number of public health measures.
Okay. So we are still in Sonoma County in the purple stage, and that's been part of the reason that the county's asked us to do as much testing as possible to buff up that denominator to see if we can move down. And I understand that this week several other counties were able to move down.
Yeah, that's correct. But our county is still where we were in the summer.
Yeah.
Our activity is still fairly high. We're also seeing something new happening. Something new is happening because recently we had 4 patients in the ICU, and 3 of them were pretty young, 42 to 55, and half of them have not survived.
Yeah.
So we're seeing something new happening with the pandemic as well, and we're trying to follow that, with how we characterize the virus.
There's a few topical issues that have come up recently. Just in the Press Democrat yesterday, they announced that the UK variant was found in a patient in Sonoma County. And then the other big news in the past week, since we did our last video, is that the J&J vaccine was approved as emergency authorization. And so those are new things that have come out. I'll just be blunt, is people are asking, is the J&J vaccine as efficacious as the Pfizer and Moderna that we're using, particularly when you talk about how it relates to these variants?
Well, that's a really important question. And what I hope to do today is I really want our providers to have the insight and the perspective to be able to speak to that to patients, because really it's a little bit apples and oranges. And let me show you what I mean. You can't talk about the variants and you can't talk about vaccine without knowing the variants, because things have changed. So let me show you the next slide. The next slide come from the CDC as of March 2nd. And this slide is going to be the one that shows you the 3 variants. The UK variant is B117. The South Africa variant is noted B1351. And the Brazil variant is P1 and also P2. In the US, we've seen a number of the B11 variants, 2,500 cases, the most cases in Florida, another bump recently in Michigan, and then California has seen a number of B117 UK variants. And those have been mainly in Southern California, but now we see them drifting into Northern California and Sonoma County. The real question, and we know, is that the variants are much more contagious. Are they more virulent? And the UK has come out with a statement that they think that the UK variant is more virulent. Brazil thinks the same. South Africa thinks the same. We haven't quantified that very well yet. Now, knowing that these variants are here is right now when we're studying vaccine. So when we studied the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, the variants weren't circulating. In the new Johnson & Johnson phase 3 study called Ensemble, now we're studying the vaccine effectiveness in the setting of variants. So those are somewhat apples and oranges. And let me show you what I mean by that. The next slide is a slide representing sort of the international landscape of vaccination. So this is the international landscape. These are all the vaccines. And I put little arrows to the left, 4 little black arrows, and these represents the one in the US. The Pfizer one, the Moderna one, those are the 2 mRNA vaccines, and they were approved under EUA. The next one is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That's an adenovirus platform vaccine that was approved on February 26th under EUA. And there's one more vaccine in the US under trial. That's a Novavax vaccine. That's a protein subunit vaccine. Just as a footnote, we're not really pursuing the adenovirus vaccine of AstraZeneca right now in the US. That has been approved in the UK. It's been used in Europe. South Africa chose not to use that vaccine. So that's kind of off the plate. So let's go forward one more slide. I'm going to take out all the other viruses in the world and just show you what's in the US. And that's what this slide shows you. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine were 95% efficacious in preventing moderate to severe disease when the strain D614G was circulating. And that was a strain out of Italy. So that vaccine trial, those 2 trials, was able to look at a virus in mainly a homogeneous fashion. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine trial Ensemble, that had to look at 3 different parts of the world, the US, Latin America, and South Africa, and they all had different variants. In the US, we had the D614G virus circulating, and that vaccine was about 72 to 80%, 86% effective in mild, moderate, severe disease. Now, if you look in South Africa, where the B1351 variant is circulating, it was 64, 82% effective. It fell down a little bit. And then in Brazil, with the P2 strain, about 66, 88% effective. But that's why you can't compare the Moderna vaccine to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It was studying against a different circulating virus. So they're kind of apples and oranges. The good news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's great for severe disease. None of the people in any parts of the world had to be in the ICU, had to be mechanically ventilated, no one went to ECMO, and in the vaccine arm, there were no deaths. So clearly the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is remarkably effective, but we just don't know how it compares to the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, because those were set up against a different viral strain. If the Moderna Pfizer vaccine was done today, I don't think they would be quite as effective with those same numbers.
So that's a good answer, because you are hearing people say, do I really want the Moderna? Do I really want the J&J? It's not as effective. The J&J has the potential of being easier to administer, but then you might have people saying, I'd rather wait and get the other vaccine. But your argument is that you can't compare them equally because they were tested in different environments.
That's right. And all three vaccines are effective.
Yeah.
All three prevent severe disease, because that's what you want to do. What we don't know is, do they prevent asymptomatic transmission? And very importantly is the Johnson & Johnson is a one-shot deal.
Right.
Without the really super cold storage. If you get the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine that requires really cold storage, perhaps that wasn't handled well, and it loses effectiveness because it wasn't handled well somewhere along the way, and it loses effectiveness like we did with the measles vaccine. So I think they're all three very good. I would use any of them for my family.
So that's the message that we should take to our patients, is that they're very, very comparable, very efficacious.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move to a little different topic. Now that we've vaccinated some portion of our county, the providers, we're starting to get questions from our patients that I've been vaccinated twice, my spouse has been vaccinated twice, can I do X, Y, or Z? They're wanting to move into an area that was previously too risky for them, and now they're trying to quantify, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
And these are hard questions to answer. Any guidance on that?
So those are really tough questions, because once you get vaccinated, certainly you feel a little bit more comfortable. There's a sigh of relief, especially when you get your second dose of the mRNA vaccines. But what can you do now? What's allowable? Remember that the vaccine strategy is meant to flatten the curve. We talked about that way back last year. We want to flatten the curve by hand washing, limiting social distancing, and now we have the vaccine strategy to try and get to herd immunity. I personally think that if you get the vaccine, you might be able to open your bubble a little bit, providing you're not putting someone else at risk. So let me show you one more slide. This slide is important because this slide tells you what are the vaccines all three of them right now do. There's one more slide I'm going to show you. This is actually the ensemble study from Johnson & Johnson. I just wanted to show you exactly what the FDA saw when they saw their vaccine. But the last slide I'm going to show you is this one. What do the vaccines do? And they do a number of things really well. They're really great at decreasing severe illness and mortality. They're very good at lowering hospital rates. They're pretty good at lowering symptomatic disease, but some people who get the vaccine are going to get somewhat symptomatic with illness. We don't know how good they are at lowering asymptomatic transmission. So what's the flip side of that? If you get the vaccine, you're not going to get super sick. Good chance of that. But if you get the vaccine, could you still acquire the virus asymptomatically and spread it to someone else? So if you're going to open your bubble a little bit, you don't want to open your bubble to someone else who's very vulnerable, because you may pass on the virus to them inadvertently, and now they're going to have trouble with the illness itself. So I personally think that if we want to flatten the curve, we need to be very careful about not opening our bubbles, not traveling. I think it's premature to think about opening schools, and I know that's been controversial. I think it's premature to open restaurants, especially for indoor dining. So I think we need to be very careful about that, because I still think we're tremendously at risk for seeing the third wave. I'll go on the record and say, I think we're going to see a third wave, just like in 1918. And it's based on a trifecta: loosening up public health measures, 3 variants around the world circulating that are more transmissible and possibly more severe. And then we haven't reached herd immunity yet. There's some vaccine hesitancy, especially in certain populations. That's going to be the perfect storm for a third wave. If we don't control all 3 of those and don't flatten the curve, third wave could be pretty tough.
Okay, well, we're going to hope you're wrong.
I hope so.
Yeah, and you know that question when a patient calls and says, "Can I do this?" Obviously it's difficult, but you know the answer always is depends. And as I've thought about this, there's several variables that we have to juggle in our mind as we're trying to form our answer to them, and that is, you know, just how big are you stretching your bubble? Are you just incorporating 2 grandchildren into it, or are you talking about going to a mass protest down at City Hall?
Right.
What is the rate of infection in your community? Obviously, a higher rate of infection, you're going to be more conservative. And what is the percent of people who have been vaccinated in your community? Although you and I talked about this earlier, you know, a county may say we've had, you know, I think Sonoma County has what you told me, 10% of people have had both vaccines. But that's not to say that's been dispersed equally. So, you know, it depends on what demographic you live in, because let's face it, the people who've been vaccinated are the elderly people, and it has had no regard for socioeconomic status. So you can't really just use the broad spectrum, what percent of people are vaccinated.
So I love your example of the grandkids. Can I see my grandkids? Can I hug my grandkids? And I think with a mask, everyone can do that, especially if you've been vaccinated. But you might want to let your grandkids not stay overnight. You know, and you might want to play with them outside, not inside. You still want to do things that kind of minimize any transmission and risk. And I think you're right. Indoor stuff is going to be somewhat difficult.
Yeah.
If I'd love to sing in a choir and I really like going to church, I'm careful not to join the choir in church just yet, even if other members are vaccinated, because there still may be transmission.
I think that the 2 things that stick in my mind in trying to answer those questions is, one, is it's not always about us, so we still have to keep in mind who we might be exposing with your theoretical issue that we could be asymptomatic carriers. So think about the risk you pose to the other people. But we as providers, we walk a very fine line. So when these people call us, we do want to give them permission to increase their bubble a little bit, to take advantage of their vaccine. We don't want to be so cautious to them that basically people who are on the verge of getting the vaccine say, well, I'm not going to get it now, because what's the point? You're not giving us any freedom or liberties to do that. And that's a fine line we walk. So we have to be careful with that, because we certainly don't want to do anything to discourage people from getting the vaccine.
Yeah, I think there are 2 major points to that argument on why even get the vaccine if I can't open my bubble.
Yeah.
One is natural infection can result in a higher chance of reinfection than getting vaccinated and getting infected. So more people can get reinfected from a variant from natural infection. Vaccine's more protective than natural infection. That's one reason to get vaccinated. The other reason to get vaccinated is kind of goes back to why we use masks. Early on in the pandemic, we all put on a mask because we wanted to protect ourselves. And then we learned that the masks are very protective to the people around us, as equally, maybe even more for some of the masks we use. Vaccination is the same way. We all feel a sigh of relief getting the vaccine because we want to be somewhat protected and somewhat prepared for not becoming so ill. But also when we get the vaccine, it really helps with herd immunity protect the people around us. That's a paradigm shift, especially in a country like ours based on capitalism, where we kind of think of ourselves first. So I think that paradigm shift and knowing that vaccine is better than natural infection is 2 reasons for us to tell our patients vaccine is very important, even if you can't open your bubble yet. You will in time, but just not yet. Because if we do it prematurely, we're going to see a third wave.
Yeah, you're going to be wrong.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, before we finish, I want to say one thing. That is, I fully appreciate that this whole vaccination effort, which is necessary, it's almost like a parallel business that Smuggler has had to put up for the sake of our patients. And I'm aware of how much it's been a distraction to our ability to practice medicine. It's pulled time from our leadership. It's been more communication with your patients, and it certainly has impacted your clinical support. But just know that you guys have continued to provide top-notch care. Everybody is valuable in this continuum of care we provide, and patients are still to this very day reaching back to us and commenting back to us how appreciative they are of the great care we continue to provide. And so I just want to give everybody hands up for that, because it's hard working in the office when things are distracted like that. So you need to hear that. Everybody values your work. So thanks for listening.